Okay, so for anybody who has questions about where you are, we will be putting notes in the chat throughout. Here are the notes about today's session. This session is expected to go 90 minutes. We are recording it. And our purpose today is to explore ways to engage your team in challenging conversations, create a psychologically safe environment for having those conversations, make the hard decisions and communicate those decisions to the people who weren't part of those conversations, and then find ways to re-engage after doing all of this wonderfully challenging work the next time. Our host today, our guide today is Kevin Eikenberry. I met Kevin, golly, 5-6 years ago when I first wrote my book, and I ran into Kevin and Wayne Turmel as they founded the Remote Leadership Institute, which is a group that does fabulous training. And Kevin does leadership training for LinkedIn Live and in large events and consulting for groups. And so we followed each other's work for years. And when I knew we needed to tackle a topic about some of the really challenging leadership-oriented discussions that we're having right now, I reached out to Kevin and said, hey, who do you know and how should we do this? And Kevin's like, got it. So here we are. And Kevin,
I don't know that I said it quite that way, but
I'm super excited to have you take over today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward. Hello, everybody who just joined, to learning from you today.
Well, thank you.
All yours.
Welcome, everybody. And so for those of you that weren't here early in the, whatever you want to call it, behind the scenes, before we started, I was told that this is the most serious topic on the docket for Elise. And I'm like, why did you pick me for a serious topic? But now she is saying it's all me, that I picked it for myself, which isn't really quite true. But nonetheless, I will just show you a slide. I guess I'll say one more thing about me. You'll learn more in the next 88 minutes than you probably want to know. But I guess I'll say that, yes, I've been working with leaders and teams around the world for a long time, 47 countries the last time I counted. And probably most important, though, is that I lead a team every single day that is hybrid in nature. And I've had to make hard decisions, and we as a team have made hard decisions. And if you are a leader for any length of time, you may have had what people might call a challenging conversation. So hopefully I bring to this conversation not only a process and some ideas, but some practical realities as well. Host is a good word. Facilitator is a better word, because we're going to learn together for the next 90 minutes. And that's, I think, not only what Elise wants. And if you've been with her before, you know that that's what you have come to expect. And that's certainly what I want as well. So again, here are the goals that she already shared with you and put in the chat. And as I'm looking at them again and thinking about what we're going to do, I'm going to tell you that a couple of these things we won't really talk about much till the end, because I think they're outcomes of doing the things that we're going to talk about throughout. When we do that, we will have created a psychologically safe environment, and it will be really quite simple to re-engage people at the end. So I think about those two as outcomes as much as anything else. And before we go any further, though, it's enough of Kevin. It's time for all of you. So if we're going to be a learning community, we got to get in the right away. And so here's how we're going to do that. Julie is going to magically put you in groups of 3, I think, in a minute here. I assume that's what she's nodding her head. So you're going to be in a group of 3 people in a moment. You're going to have 6 minutes. Those are your 2 questions you see in there on the slides. They're also in the chat. So because when you leave, you won't see the slide anymore. One thing we have in common, the 3 of us, and one question we'd like answered today. When you come back, be ready to share those. Now, there's only 3 of you, so it shouldn't be too hard. But someone has to facilitate, right? So if someone doesn't proactively decide, it will be the person whose last name is last alphabetically. So figure it out. Julie, give them whatever instructions you need to give them and send them away for 6 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. We're glad that you're back. So glad that you're back, actually. And so I know that you may not remember which group you were in. So I'm going to ask Julie to tell us who was in each group real quick. So I want to hear, I only want to hear the in common thing if it's like amazing or like surprising, right? Like if we all are wearing shoes, although, okay, maybe that's surprising now. It didn't used to be. But fundamentally, what I want to hear are the questions. But if you've got a really awesome in common, I want to hear that too. So group one, who's in group one, Julie?
We had CJ, Ludovic, Marta, and Dieter.
What's your question? Did you have one?
Yes, how to give bad news to the team, especially news that didn't originate from your mind. If it was given to you from on high and you have to deliver that bad news.
As the messenger, right? Okay, cool. Thank you. Group two. Who's in group two, Julie?
We had Kimberly, Michael, and Stacy.
Hey, I'm reporting out for the group. I'm sorry, nothing exciting. I'm hoping you're going to cover it, and that's how to convey information to team members who weren't in the decision-making process, which is part of what I'm hoping you're going to do. And then the other one is how to create safety beyond establishing and refereeing norms or team guidelines.
Say that second one again, please.
How to create safety beyond establishing and refereeing team norms, meeting norms, or guidelines.
All right. Oh, sometimes the answers are easy, but the work is not. That will be the answer to that. Okay, group three.
Group three, we had Betsy, Jamie, and Suzanne.
Our question is wanting something actionable that we can bring back from this seminar to our work.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Betsy. Group four.
Betsy, Clayton, Jennifer, or Michael?
Hi, it's Jenny. Well, we had three questions. One was how to balance agility with structure. One was how to have challenging conversations now that face-to-face might be impossible. And one was how to foster psychological safety from below, if the unsafety is coming from above.
So fostering psychological safety from below. Is that what you said?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Jenny. Group five. I think I'm keeping up. Group five?
Yep. Group five, we had 301255, Daphne, Emily, and Griffiths.
Yeah, hi, Stu here. We talked a little bit about, how best to document some of these tough decisions. Our experiences, we have a lot of chatter and discussion of the management team, but not great at documenting some of the tough decisions.
All right. So I'm just going to ask you, Stu, is that a skill problem or a will problem?
It's probably a bit of both. Certainly it's not a skill issue, but things just seem to be, a lot of discussion. And when you look for a decision record, we mowed this lawn a month ago and, we don't seem to be able to have much documentation.
Okay. Thank you. Group six.
Group six, we had John, Melanie, and Nicoletta.
Oh, it was me. Okay. I thought it was John. Okay. So like our common thing was courage, which was you were kind of like leading us with the breakout room thing. And our question was, well, it wasn't like a specific question, but like ways to resolve conflict within a group and how to re-engage after that. Right? I hope.
Okay. Thank you, Nicoletta. Group seven.
We seem to have lost the members of group seven. So on to group eight.
Group eight.
B, Nikki, and Peter.
Yeah, our question is how to manage the big emotions that come with difficult topics or change.
Okay. Thank you. Group nine.
Trisha, Angela, and Nan.
Hello, I just put it in the chat, but one of the things is similar to what group 8 said is managing when people have different and competing values.
All right. And group 10, last group. Yes, Julie?
Yep. Last group, we had Carolyn, Danny, Danielle, Danielle, and Lenny.
Yes, so we were also interested in the psychological safety concept and how to operationalize it in a variety of different settings. We realized that that must be quite different if you're thinking about sort of a decentralized team versus a highly centralized team versus a small team versus a big team.
All right. All right. So we've identified about 3 days worth of content. Thank you all very much. And so listen, seriously, there's a lot of really great stuff there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to touch on some of those as we go. And if you feel like I've passed something that, hey, this was your chance to talk about this, Kevin, and we didn't, then just say something, right? So I want this to be as interactive as it can be with 30 plus of us from around the world. And so, put a note in the chat. I'm following the chat, unmute and just say something, feel free. But I'm going to try to address some of these as we go. And then I think some of them will fall nearer the end. And I won't promise we get to all of them because there's a lot there, right? And I guess I could just not show any slides and we could talk about all those things. But instead, what I'm going to try and weave those things together as we go, right? So I'm a big believer that before we get to skill set, we have to have the right mindset. And I think that's really always important. I think it's especially important with this particular topic. So what I'm going to do, and this is going to be sort of the framework for our time together. There are 4 big ideas in that very long title. Gracefully leading teams through hard decisions and challenging conversations. So we're going to talk about each of those 4 things. And we're going to talk about skills, obviously, skill set, habit set. So I'm going to go back to Stu's point. Like maybe there's some skill issue around those decisions, but here's my bet. My bet is we didn't really fully decide. Like if we really fully decided and everyone was in agreement, it wouldn't be so hard to unpack it and remow that lawn a month later. I'm just wondering if that isn't in there a little bit, and you don't have to necessarily respond, but I'm wondering that. It crosses my mind, right? But mindset, skill set, habit set, starting with mindset, and that first word, gracefully. And as Elise and I were talking about this, I believe it was me that suggested that word. And if it wasn't, I wish I had been smart enough to do that because I believe it's an important part of this process. So that word is grace. Now, based on my beliefs, that word means a lot. To you, that word may or may not have the same meaning it does to me. So I'm not talking about gracefully like being a dancer and having aplomb and skill. I'm talking about things like forgiveness, patience, understanding, and kindness. That's what I'm talking about. So if the word grace doesn't strike you exactly in this context, this is what I want you to think about, right? There are 2 words in this title, hard and challenging, right? So how can we practice forgiveness, patience, understanding, and kindness? And so from my perspective, thank you, Michael, for adding another question. Okay, cool, got it. All right, so let's talk specifically about what I think it means to grant grace in this context. I think we could certainly talk about that as it relates to diversity and inclusion issues, to Michael's last question, for sure. I think it applies probably to several of these, including conveying information to those who were not in the decision, which I think was from group 2, right? So when we grant grace when we allow people to respond and react. If we're we're going to talk more about what hard decisions are and challenging conversations are in a bit. But let's just start here. If we think it's hard, or we think it's going to be challenging, or we're expecting emotions or whatever, then we need to give people space to respond, to react, and not judge them in that moment. Right? And not immediately. So I use the words respond and react. I actually think those 2 words are somewhat different because if you go to the doctor, if you've been to the doctor and they give you a medication and you come back for your next checkup and the doctor says you're responding to the medication, you're going to feel pretty good. But if they say you're having a reaction, then maybe you don't feel so good about that, right? The point is that we have to give people space and they may react. right? And it may be emotional, but granting grace is saying that's okay. And we're not going to judge them instantly because of that. And granting grace is acknowledging that there will be resistance, right? I'm guessing if I were to go to each of you and unpack when you think about this idea of this is going to be hard or this is going to be challenging, you're in part thinking about resistance, right? Something's going to change here. So someone's going to resist. By the way, should we be surprised by that? Of course we should not. Resistance is naturally occurring anytime there's change. Sometimes in a fleeting moment, sometimes for a long time, naturally occurring. Let me ask you all a question. Go in the chat and get ready to give me your answer to this question, okay? When you think about people going through a change is being introduced, right? And the one group said, you're sharing a message, bad news given to the team, and you're only the messenger. That was group one, right? So whether it's that or whatever it is, a change is coming, right? Would you rather have people resistant or apathetic? Just tell me in the chat. R or A? Resistant or apathetic? Which would you rather have? Yes, you're all saying R so far. Guess what? I agree. Why? Why is that? Well, because for one thing, I once had a teenage daughter, and there's not much you can do with whatever, Dad. Like you can't do anything with, like, what do you do with that? Like, there's nothing there. Dead weight. What? So here's what I have observed about the idea of resistance. Everyone gets all freaked out, technical term, and worried about people who are going to be resistant. And yet, given that, posing that, you'd rather have resistance. Why would you rather have resistance? Because they care. There's no resistance if there's no energy. There's a level of caring, whether it's about the organization, whether it's about the team, whether it's about their peers, whether it's about themselves, that's existing. And resistant is about energy, right? And when people are resistant, they care, as it says in the chat. That's exactly right. So we need to acknowledge it, not be surprised by it. And here's the thing. I use that word acknowledge on purpose, because that's what we should do with resistance. We shouldn't immediately try to change it. We shouldn't try to immediately correct it or inform people or tell them why they should make the change, and none of that. Acknowledging it is, that's how they're feeling right now. Have any of you ever experienced this? Yes, getting curious. Exactly right. Because here's the thing, from people's resistance, you're going to find out where they're at. And the issue could be that they just don't understand the change yet. It could be that they do understand it and don't like it. Or it could be that they're just upset and you're the messenger, and so you can't take it personally. But the point is that, have you ever felt resistant to something and had the chance to let it out, and after you did that, you felt better and felt less resistance? If we don't acknowledge the resistance, we don't let people respond and react, it's just like shaking up the pop can or soda can or Coke can, depending on where you live, right? Like, and the more you shake it up, and you shake it up for a while, you don't want to open it. But if it's just been sitting there and you open it, yeah, there's pressure, it's manageable. So acknowledge resistance. Remember that people are learning in this moment of challenge, in this moment of hard decision, they're learning. And while we're learning, we're vulnerable. And while we're learning, it's new. And while we're learning, it's okay. So remember that. Don't take things personally, because sometimes people are going to lash out. They're going to say stuff they don't mean, or it's not about you, most likely. So don't take it personally, because if you take it personally, then your response or your reaction might not be all that helpful. I'm talking about granting grace here. And the last thing is, one of my 4 words I gave you for grace is patience. Be patient. Give people a little time. Put on my Teflon suit. I like that. That's the Teflon suit. Can you buy those on Amazon? That's the question. My kids are past that, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. So first word in the title, gracefully. And this is what I think it means. Whether we're talking about a decision, whether we're talking about a conversation, whether we're talking about delivering a message. Now, let me just ask you this. If we do this well, or even relatively well, what happens to psychological safety? Up or down? Up. Right? So that I think is the key. Like if we will go into this recognizing that if it's really hard and challenging, then that other people on the other side of this might have differing feelings. They don't have as much information as us, perhaps. And so it's okay to give them space and grant them time and be okay with that. And we've got to be ready to separate from that. We got to be ready to not escalate that. And we've got to be ready to be curious about it. Right? So, all right. Second thing in the word was leading teams, right? Gracefully leading teams. So remember, leading a team is an individual endeavor. One of the things that leaders do is we take things on ourselves. Like, this is my job. I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm supposed to be the expert. Like, we put all this weight on our shoulders. And don't misunderstand me in that, as a leader, whether it's positional or otherwise, with it comes responsibility, but also with it comes opportunity. And if we want to really create a true, highly effective team, it isn't just about us, right? And so you're going to hear me say this several times, is that we've got to reframe the way we think about all this. Which leads me to our next chance to get Julie to work and all of you to work. All right. Okay. Yes, Caroline, I got to say something to Caroline before we get to this. This, I got to go back for just a second, because if you didn't see it, Caroline in the notes, there she is, says, "I'm thrilled to realize I'm in a training that speaks to both my professional work and for parenting work." I believe that. To be a better leader is to be a better human being. And so, quite honestly, those two things go together. So I'm hopeful that you get ideas here, even though our context is not going to be parenting, right? Probably no one with a parenting expertise is going to ask me to be their guest. And yet, the reality is the overlap is significant and important. So while our context will be organizational and business and professional and all that stuff, I hope we're thinking about it more broadly than that, because we're dealing with hard decisions and challenging conversations every day with people in our lives, right? Regardless of the role that we have as the receiver or sender, right? Or decider or whatever. Okay. So hard decisions. You're going to go into breakout groups. I think I said 5 people, 5 or 6, Julie, whatever that works out to be. And so your small groups are going to be a little bit bigger. I'm going to give you a little bit longer. You're going to likely be with different people. Say hello quickly and then get down to work. Here's the question, or 2-part question, really. When you think about hard decisions, what are examples? And more importantly, why are they hard? I want some examples of the hard decisions that you come here with. And why do you say they're hard? That's your task. Someone's got to take the lead. The person who needs to take the lead here is, if you don't pick someone, is the person who next celebrates a birthday. That will be your facilitator. Julie, send them off. Welcome back, everybody. Glad that you're here. Glad that you're back. I'm looking at the clock, thinking about how we're going to manage our time, because I don't want to have to communicate at the end that we didn't finish. So here's what we're going to do. Rather than going through 10, 5, 7 groups, how many groups do we have this time, Julie?
We had 6 groups.
6 groups. Instead of going through 6 groups, here's what we're going to do. The question really was, so the 2 parts of the question. Someone from each group, your facilitator, whomever, someone go into the chat and tell us some examples of hard decisions. That's the first thing. We just want to quickly have a spray of examples of hard decisions in the chat. Let's do that part first, real quickly. And then, of course, then I'm going to ask, then we're going to do it.
Maybe we can all write the hard decisions we had.
Yeah, go right ahead and do that. Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead and do that. And then we'll do some verbal piece on the second half, right? Changing organizational structure, team layoffs. Okay. Accountability strong, but not accusatory. Team alignment. Deciding to enter a tough conversation. All right. Deciding whether to sell land for affordable housing. That's an interesting one. Team member isn't delivering. Oh, really? We're going to have, we might have someone who's not delivering on their expectations. That's shocking. Decisions about people's responsibilities and reporting structure, deciding and making accountability strong but not accusatory, decisions about Let's see, team member not meeting. Okay, staff reduction discussions with individuals. All right, a lot of stuff about that. Anything that creates tension between people. All right. By the way, you all know what the absence of tension is? Death. So let's not be so worried about a little tension. Now, there is such a thing as too much. I understand that. What to do with a daughter? Whoa. I want to stay out of this. I already said I'm not the parenting dude. What to do with a daughter that doesn't seem to want to do anything with herself? Okay, not qualified. My daughter, I don't have that problem, but or whatever. I don't have that situation currently, but I'm not qualified. Thank you for thinking that maybe I am, I suppose. Letting you let someone go who's going through something really bad like divorce, cancer at the same time. Okay, cool. So there's a tremendous number of things. Right now, I just want you all, and there are more, thank you, Emily. Decision on an event theme that was more radical, voted on, Okay, all right. So here's, I think that while we won't be able to address every one of those, I really wanted that to get a context of where we're headed. I'll try to use some of those things as examples as we go. I believe that the things we're going to talk about here will be helpful regardless. Okay. And so you work to apply them to your situations as we go, and I'll try to use some of those as context for the conversation. So, but I want to know, why do we all think they're hard? So just if you really, as you've now all heard all the list, you heard it in your small group and you heard it in the big group or are reading it. Question is, why are they hard? Why are they hard? Did you come to any conclusions on that? Anybody?
Yeah.
There's an emotional component, strong opinions, loss of control, emotions. They impact people's lives. So it looks like values, emotions, deemed as being something the other person is not going to like, right? Okay. So let me see if I can draw some lessons from all of that. Dangerous, I know, to have it on a slide already when I didn't know what you would say, right? Is everything a democracy? No, it's not. So we'll get to that a little bit in a bit, okay? Emotional decision-making versus facts. By the way, we all make decisions based on emotion, even those people who say they don't. If everyone made decisions based totally on logic, we'd all drive a Kia. No disrespect to Kias. Just saying. Okay, so let me say some lessons we can take. Some of the things that you all have talked about are decisions that we have to make and then share. Or some of them are decisions made above us that we have to share. I understand that. And many of them that were listed were decisions that were made as a group. So I guess I know that this first point won't apply to all of the situations, but it's still a truism. That is, decisions are often harder when we make them alone, when we think we have to, or when we choose to, or when we isolate, right? So I know that this first point doesn't apply to everything that came through the chat. I understand that, right? Second point, and I'm just going to put it up there and read it to you. Don't make it harder in your head. Like, language matters here. I'm going to say more about that in a minute, right? But I'll just do it this way. Have any of you ever experienced, you could have experienced this directly on either side or hearing it from someone else. Have you ever heard of this scenario? Someone got fired and determined it was the best thing that ever happened to them. Sometimes even almost immediately. So why would we immediately assume? You follow what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is we got to be careful not to let this start in our head. That's all. I'm not trying to downplay any of it, but don't make it harder in your head. Second, next thing is compliance is too low of a bar. When we talk about decisions, now I'm talking about the ones that involve a group. right? Not necessarily the ones of I need to have a conversation with you as an individual contributor about your performance or something like that, right? I don't let me leave this slide without remembering to do that, but I want to do that, right? Yeah, and Nan says, who is to say the emotion you are experiencing is the right or only emotion? Amen. It's yours. It's fine. Not the only one, or to assume that everyone else is going to respond or react the same way you did. That's why we got to start by giving people that chance to respond. I'll talk more about that before we're done. If we're talking about decisions that are going to impact other people, I'm going to go back to this. It's often, if we try to do it alone, we may end up with compliance, but what we don't want is compliance. What we want is commitment. To me, one of the single most important questions to ask as a leader is this: do I want to lead for commitment or lead for compliance? And if we want to lead for commitment, that implies people get involved, and people can be committed. All of us have been committed to things that wouldn't have been our first choice. We don't have to get everybody. We don't have to have consensus to have commitment. Do not. Right? Especially if we're creating a level of trust and a level of psychological safety, like we've already been talking about. Like if we create that, and I'll say more about that a little bit later. Right. The next thing is sometimes as organizations, and I'll say this, I mean, not only am I the leader of the organization, but as one of my team members always says, Kevin, you sign all the paychecks, right? So there are 15 people on our team. I do sign, I mean, there isn't a physical paycheck, but you know what I'm saying? Like my name is on the door, my name is at the bottom of the check. And so sometimes it's easy to say, well, I want to take care of people. I don't want to make this too hard for people. But guess what? We're adults. We all face plenty of hard decisions. We don't necessarily, now I'm not talking, the first word here is grace. I'm not talking about being rude. I'm not talking about being overly direct. I'm not talking about any of that. And yet it's not like we're all not equipped for this at some level. Now, if someone's in a certain situation, man, we got to think about whether we're going to fire them at the same time someone's got cancer. Like I know life is hard. Like I get that. Right. And it still can be hard. Right. Now, I promised before I went on, I want to talk very specifically about this issue about folks who maybe aren't living up to expectations. By the way, that's not how you said it, but that's how I'm going to say it. If we've got someone who's a poor performer, right? If you're a leader, you got one of those folks that like, man, I just wish I could figure out how to fix that one person. Question one, do they know what you expect? Because if they don't know what you expect, it's impossible for them to deliver. And it's not like, well, Michael delivers and Stephanie delivers and Jen delivers. That's not the question. The question is, does Nan know? Does Nan understand that? Sorry, Nan. Like the point is, if the person doesn't truly know what's expected, it's not possible without luck for them to be delivering. And it isn't whether you told them, it's about whether they understand. Communication is not message sent. It's message sent and message received and understood. So we've got to, so the first thing is, if you've passed that hurdle, then this won't be nearly as hard a decision because it won't be a surprise. Like we've been at this for 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever. And, we've got a clear metric and you're not there. And hopefully that person already knows that. And I'm not talking about HR here. There's nothing wrong. I mean, I'm not discounting the HR process that you might have, but I'm just saying, as a leader and as a coach and as a human, we've got to make sure that people know what's expected, be clear about that, let them know how it will be measured, and help them make progress. And if they don't get there, it should be of no surprise to anyone. And if we're having this conversation because it's a surprise, then we haven't done our job right. Now, the whole thing about I've got to let them go at the same time that they have cancer or whatever, like I get that. And I would say at that point, you've got to make a new decision. Like, have you really, if the organization says, we've got to cut the headcount, we got to cut the dollars. First of all, I would say if someone says to me, got to cut the headcount, and say, do you care about headcount or do you care about dollars? Because it's very possible that your team would be willing in the short term to take less money to keep the whole team there. Is that the question is, don't take things off the table before they need to be taken off the table. Sometimes we think it's been given to us, I got to go do this. Ask some questions. Don't be disrespectful. Ask some questions. Let's see what we really got here, what our real options are. That make sense? So one more thing on this slide. Sometimes you're having these expectation conversations of people nod along and have a parade of reasons why it's an issue day, but what we do tomorrow. Okay, great. That's fine, John. Okay, great. So we can talk about, we're not going to talk about the past. We're going to talk about the future. So what are we going to do starting tomorrow differently to meet this new expectation? We'll just use numbers, right? Like the expectation is 100 and you're at 93. Like, what do we do tomorrow to move toward 94, 95, 96? Like, okay. They think it's a reason. You may hear it as an excuse. Doesn't matter. All that matters is tomorrow, right? And I can have that conversation. I should be able to have that relatively dispassionately and really care in a caring way. Talk about, okay, awesome. Yep. You know what? And by the way, if expectations weren't clear before, it doesn't just belong to them. It belongs to us too. So we can own it with them and we can talk about accountability in that regard, right? And by the way, that conversation done in that sort of way will also begin to create psychological safety. Oh, by the way, right? Nikki, having been a similar situation, we changed the question. We were asking ourselves, is this a good time for X to be let go? Because it never is. Instead to, will there be a better time for this conversation? And then will the organization be okay if we wait until then? That's a great way to reframe it, which leads to my next point on this slide. Thank you, Nikki. Language frames our thoughts and actions. So while I'm really thrilled to be delivering this session for you all, and when Elise and I put this together, I knew where I was going to start. That's why I wanted the word gracefully in there, right? But where I was going to start is, once we call them hard and challenging, we're setting ourselves up to make it hard and challenging. Notice the point before this. It can still be hard. Like, I understand that. I'm not discounting it. I'm just saying, don't make it harder in your head. And remember that language frames it. Right? That will help you, and it will help you help the other people on the other side of this. Okay. So here we are. We've talked about gracefully. We've talked a little bit about the hard decisions, but I want to say a little bit more about decisions in general. Okay. And so now I'm not talking necessarily about those one-on-one ones, but the ones that we might make with the team. Right. There were a number of things that came up in the chat where we voted. We tried to reach consensus, do all sorts of things. So let's talk about those. First of all, I don't know if you know this, but Jeff Bezos at Amazon identified two different kinds of decisions. And I think it's super important. And so here they are. Bezos said, he famously wrote about this in one of his annual reports. I don't remember which year. He said, hey, we face two kinds of decisions. One type of decisions are type 1 decisions, and they're not reversible. If we make these decisions, here we go. Right? And the type 2 decisions are like walking through a door. We can change it. We can go back. We can go through a different door, or we can change our mind. Here's what happens. We treat an awful lot of type 1 decisions, an awful lot of type 2 decisions like they're type 1 decisions. So I think it's important, if we're making the decision ourselves, or if we're making it with our team, to decide which this is, right? And if it's a type 1 decision, then we need to take a deep dive. We need to roll up our sleeves. We need to get after it. And we likely need to have other people involved, right? But if it's a type 2 decision, we just need to go. Let's get started. And oftentimes, so you may not have ever thought about this framework, but there may be times when you as a leader, I'll bet this will resonate with you. When you as a leader said, like, I'm making this decision, we're going to try this, we're going to see what happens. And everyone else sees it as if, oh my gosh, the world has changed forever. They're viewing it like it's non-reversible, not changeable, massive change in direction when you're trying to do an experiment. Right? So this, I think, is clarity for us in terms of how we go about it, but also in terms of how we talk about them with each other, which can help make it less hard, not necessarily, well, maybe less hard to decide if it's type 2, but less hard for people to accept based on which it is. Okay. Now, how do we actually make decisions? There's three sort of very simple, basic ways that we make decisions. We make directed decisions. I'm the leader. I make the call. We make collaborative decisions, and there's a whole range of what that looks like. And then we try to get to consensus. I'm going to do this pretty quickly. I have a sense from this group that this isn't going to be major news, but I think there's a couple important points here. So here's what a directed decision looks like. When do we make a directed decision? When the outcome is likely to be supported. I can these are probably not the quote hard decisions that we're talking about, but sometimes, right? When I have the leader has all of the information, all of the expertise, all of the knowledge needed, or all that's available. Sometimes I have made the mistake of trying to get my team involved in stuff when, like, I have to tell them everything there is that's already in my head, and then we're basically just adjudicating because they don't have anything new to add in that particular case. Right. So maybe the better chance is to just make the decision, or if the decision is not widely shared. Well, this is the case, obviously, if we don't need to bring the whole team together in most cases. A couple of notes in the chat to the contrary, perhaps, but we don't need to bring the whole team together to say, well, are we going to let go of Michael? Like, we don't need to do that. Like, the problem is not widely shared really in that regard. And of course, the biggest advantage of the directed decision is what? Speed. If there's a need for urgency, we need to make a decision, like, doesn't impact everybody. Maybe it's not that big a deal. This probably isn't where the hard decisions are, I realize, but this is certainly one of the ways we make decisions. All right. Okay. All right. So second is collaborative decisions, right? And so now the arrows are running both directions, right? From the leader to all the team members, the bubbles or other folks on the team, right? So the problem is shared. Additional information is needed by other people besides the leader. So they want to bring other people in. This could look like, hey, everybody send me an email with your thoughts. This could be a meeting. This could be any number of things. Someone said, how do we have the meetings when we can't be face-to-face? Or something along those lines, right? I'm looking for the note there. I see it somewhere. Have a balance of agility and structure without being face-to-face. Well, sometimes we may need to have these kinds of meetings virtually. Our tools are sophisticated enough now to allow us to do this. Turn on your webcams, right? Some more to come on this here, but when there's a shared problem, when you need information from other people, whether it's a little or a lot, when you want greater commitment, and when there's time, because if there's not time, don't do this, right? Thank you, Suzanne. Okay. And then there's consensus, which seems oftentimes to be like, this is the holy grail. This is where we should shoot for, right? And the thing about a consensus decision is also a shared problem. But notice how on my picture is different. Now the focus is not on the leader. The focus is on the decision, and everyone is focused on the decision, including the leader. And notice that the leader's bubble is no different than anybody else's bubble, right? If the goal is shared by all, we can go there. If acceptance and commitment is critical and we don't think we can get it any other way, and this is highly important but not necessarily urgent, then maybe we want to go to consensus. Maybe. Yes or no in the chat? How many of you have ever felt frustrated with the process or time required to reach consensus in a group? Yes or no in the chat? Even the expert who brought us all here said yes. Just saying. It isn't always required. It's a choice. It's an option. It's one of the things we can consider. And I've given you a few things here to think about. Now, all of that to lead to this point, which gets us to this point about hardness, right? So this graph, I want you to think about it this way. I want you to think about this axis being commitment, agreement, acceptance, buy-in, whatever word you want to use. By the way, I don't love the word buy-in. It's a low bar, right? But like the higher up here, the more committed, accepting people are of the decision, right? This is how much time it will take, right? So what we can do is this. We can draw a line. It's not drawing a line. It's not doing what I wanted it to do. Let's do it this way. We use a different approach. in just a second. There we go. There's the line. So down here, we get all fancy with our colors. There is your independent directed decision. Doesn't take much time, might not get much commitment, but depending on the kind of decisions you might still get a lot of commitment, right? Like someone needs to decide where we're going to lunch. Someone just decide, right? There's smoke in the building. We need to leave the building. Where's the exit? You get a commitment to that. You don't have to have it, right? So, but at some level, there's the independent decision, the directed decision. Here are the range of collaborative decisions, depending on how much collaboration, how much time was spent, how the collaboration took place, right? And then up here somewhere is consensus. Okay. Now I've, sort of very simply drew a 45-degree angle. Like this is not exactly it. There are factors that could change this line. Yeah. Right. Like, but the first point here to realize is that we're making decisions, hard or otherwise. We're trading off possible commitment for time it takes. In every given situation, that's a trade-off worth considering and deciding what you're going to do about that, right? Time is the bottom axis. Here's time. And here is commitment or acceptance or buy-in or whatever word you want. Okay. Okay. This is going to be ugly. Acceptance, time. Okay. Now, what are some factors that could change this pink line? That could change where the line starts or the slope of the line? Well, number of people involved, right? More people involved. Well, who makes the decisions? Well, we've sort of decided in a way how that's going to be done based on the approach, right? But how many people? More people. Let me change colors again here. The more people involved, flatter the line, right? Take us longer to get to the same level of commitment, right? The more complex the decision, more complex, what happens to the line? Whoops. What happens to the line is it gets shallower again, right? More complexity, takes us longer to figure out what the right answer is, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm overstating the slope change, but you get the idea, right? Number of people can change the line. Fewer people, steeper line. More people, shallower line. More complex, shallower. Less complex, steeper, right? Lots of factors could play into it. But there's another one that's really important. And it relates to how we'll make the decision at the end of the day. It relates to how hard this is going to be even, right? Low levels of trust across the team or with the leader. High levels of trust. Now I started up here. I'm going to give you an example. Here's what I'm going to do this. Notice how much higher you started this line. I had a client a number of years ago that the company was part of 3 other companies, and they were asked. I don't know what the Stacy matrix is. That sounds like maybe there's inside knowledge that I don't have, Nicoletta. Okay, cool. So here's the thing. This client was working hard to create work teams with no leaders, right? Self-directed work teams. So one of the skills they wanted to build was the skill of consensus. And so one of the many things I helped that organization with was building the skills of consensus. And guess what they found? They were as skilled at building consensus from a skill perspective as any group I've ever seen. And these included people running a plant, front line. And guess what? The more skilled they got, the less times they went to consensus. Why? Because trust levels were higher and they didn't need to do it. Like if this is the group, I trust Nan. Nan, just make the call. I'm in. High level, for our purposes right here, with 25 minutes to go, we can use trust and psychological safety the same. If there's high levels of psychological safety, right? If there's high levels of psychological safety, then chances are we don't have to go to some of these extremes. And oh, by the way, the higher that is, the less likely these decisions, while they may be hard decisions to make, they won't be as hard for people to accept. There's a difference between hard to decide and hard to swallow, right? And the decisions that are harder to swallow are the ones that we came as a surprise. We didn't really know. We didn't have any input, all that stuff. And so if we can't give people that input, then we have to recognize that that's what's coming. And when that happens, it becomes what? I got to get rid of all this stuff. Hold on. When it becomes that, then what happens? It becomes a challenging conversation. That's the last part of our thing, right? Now I have a next slide, but I know what will happen with this group if I do it, so I'm probably not going to. I'll put it up here, but I'll do it quickly. I don't have time for everyone to give me your answers, but I do want to know what your thoughts are to this. Like when I say challenging conversation, what crosses your mind? Somebody give me an example real quick. Anybody? Give me an example of a challenging conversation. Obviously, some of the things you mentioned earlier are there, but anybody else?
With a big risk, but a big chance too.
Oh, John, there you go. John, be careful. You're hitting home there, buddy. I was worried about that last April, just saying. We made it, not too bad, but I was wondering it, right? Decreasing racist remarks in an interview, salary. Okay. Could be lots of things. And in all these cases, again, where do we come back to? There's emotion. There may be differences in values, right? The elephant in the room, person bringing the problem is a big part of the problem. By the way, here's one of the things not to do as a leader. Like you got one person that you want to give feedback to, and you give that feedback to the whole group. Don't do that. Everybody knows who it's for, except the person it's for. Don't do that, right? It's not fair to everybody. It's not fair to anybody. And it's not effective. But people do it because they want to avoid the challenging conversation, right? Oh my gosh, I can't talk to Michael about that. I wouldn't know what I'd say to Michael, right? You look pretty innocuous, Michael, actually. It looks maybe deceiving, but you follow my point, okay? So what I thought we'd do is we'd talk about preparing for these and then delivering them. Fair enough. So, and we need to keep moving because we got to have time. I got to back up at the end. I need how much at the very end? 8 minutes? Yeah, I got to go quick. Okay. So here's the thing. Preparing for challenging conversations, engage sooner. Seldom does waiting make it better. I say seldom, but it's probably almost never. And I'm as guilty as the next person, right? Engage sooner. Second, think about timing, tools, and turf. Here's what I mean. How soon can I do it? What tools am I going to use to do it? And if we're living in a world where we're not working together, if we're going to be remote, then turn on the darn webcams, right? And if you're hybrid, then when and where do we have these meetings? Do we have them when we're together or when we're not? Whose office? Not in the glass office, not in the coffee shop, not in the cafeteria, right? Right. Now we have to be clear. Yeah, we could talk about the power dynamics. We talk about the dress. We could talk about where we're going to, if it's in our office, where we're going to sit. I have my office right here. I have a desk and I have a chair across the desk, but I also have 2 chairs across the way that are comfortable chairs that face each other. Probably have us in the comfortable chairs. Now, you don't want it to be where you only go to the comfy chairs when it's going to be a bad conversation. Don't do that. Right. And if you've never used your webcam, start using them once in a while, because otherwise, when you turn on the webcam, they go, spaghetti-o, webcams, this can't be good. Like you don't want to do that either. Right. Okay. So be clear on the message. What is it really that you need to say? What is the message that you need to have them to get to be delivered, and what is the outcome? What is your desired outcome from this? It can't be that I sent the message. It has to be that they understand the message. Like know your outcome. Think about your audience. Is it one person? Is it a group of people? And absolutely, John, know when to stop talking. Notice the fourth word in this title, conversation. Conversation means we're both talking. It's not a monologue. It's not a lecture. It's a conversation. We'll get to that when we get to the delivering it in a second. Okay. So, and then the last thing I want to say here. So think about your audience. Where are they at? What do they know? How big of a, what is this going to mean? What sort of project, do what I call a reaction tree. And what I'm going to show you now is not perfect, but hopefully it'll get you the idea across. So when I think of a reaction tree, I'm thinking like, okay, so what are the things that might happen here, right? So if I get resistance, what will I do? What will that resistance look like? Will that resistance look like disagreement? If I get disagreement, what would be how would I play that out? If I get surprise, how would I play that out? If I get anger, how would you could just make this, take it whatever you want it to be, right? You could make this as flat. And so the reaction tree is, what reaction might I get, anticipate and have a bit of a plan for what you might do in any one of those places, in any one of those situations. Okay. I call it a reaction tree. I need a better visual, but hope for those of you that are on video, if that makes sense, if you got it, give me a thumbs up, or do I need to do more? Okay, I'm going to move on. But my point is to think about how they might react, and therefore what you might do. But I'll just put the next slide up. Prepare, but don't overthink or obsess. Yeah, exactly. It's like what we taught our kids. What will you do? What will you say? How will you have that conversation? Right? Absolutely right. Prepare, but don't overthink or obsess. So think about it. Be sort of prepared. But notice what we said earlier at the very beginning about granting grace is we got to give people the space to react. And John said, it's got to be a real conversation. Know when to stop talking. And when to stop talking is sooner. Right. So now let's have the conversation. So we've kind of prepared. We've done some things sooner than later. Think about where, think about the power dynamics, think about all that stuff. Start with a question. How do they think they have done it? And of course, Nan, that's a great question. It all depends. If we're talking about a performance issue, right? Or we're going to give hard feedback, that's absolutely where I'm going to start. Of course, what that opening question would be all depends on the nature of, the challenging conversation we're having. As a quick aside, I would say that anytime you're giving feedback, it should always start with asking them how they think they're doing. Always. Always is a long time, my dad said. I stick by it. Okay, so how do we have the conversation? Don't project. Don't project onto them how hard they think it's going to be. Oh my gosh, what are they going to do? Like, yes, reaction tree. Don't obsess. Don't project on them. So here's what we need to do. Empathize and listen. Which means we're not doing all the talking. Which means we're listening to what they're saying. Which means we're giving them a chance to share. Have you ever had this conversation with someone? You're upset about something or whatever, and you talk, and they don't really say much of anything. You've been on both sides of this, by the way. One person does all the talking. The other, they're upset, they're worried, they're frustrated, they're stressed, whatever. They do all the talking, they vent. The other person says almost nothing, and the first person feels so much better and says thank you. And the other person, I didn't do anything. Yes, they did. You let them talk. We need to open up the topic, talk about it. We need to focus on the audience. We need to talk about not just what the decision is or what the difficult situation is, but why it matters and why it's happening. Because sometimes in a change effort, people won't love the decision, but they understand why the decision is being made, right? We're gonna quit doing business with this customer. Oh, I love that customer. We can't do that. I don't like that decision, but if I understand why we're changing our business, I can accept that. I can understand that, right? Here's the thing. A lot of times people say, I just need to go in and be direct and tell them. Be careful with the word direct. There are some people for whom direct will be fine. There are other people for whom you say, if I'm not direct, I'm beating around the bush. I'm not saying that. Here's my view on this. Be clear and kind. And I believe that by being clear, we're actually being kind, because they know exactly what's expected. They know exactly what's coming. They know exactly what the decision is. Actively listen. And we're not going to get there. So if you can put at least that tool for decision documentation in that was talked about earlier, if you can put that in there, right? Be clear and be kind. Clarify your message. Make sure they got the message. Make sure that you're moving a conversation with patience, with grace, towards the desired outcome. Right? If you planned and you know that here's the outcome we need to get to, then how do I get there? And keep this in mind. It's not on the slide. Keep this in mind. What I'm hoping for is commitment and not simply compliance. Not just whatever you say, boss. That's not what we're after. You might have to settle for it, but hopefully that's not where we end up. Okay. Yeah. The difference between supportive and defensive language. And by the way, that will help. So by the way, these last two slides, if we prepare for these conversations and have them like this, what happens to psychological safety? Even if it's hard, how is it going to be hard? Is it going to be harder or easier to re-engage them the next time? Easier. If we want to create more psychological safety, and we're not going to really have much time for this because I'm going to put you in a breakout group in a sec. If we want to create more psychological safety in our organizations, don't wait for somebody else to start. I'm going to draw the analog with trust again real quick, okay? Because I think if you have trust, you have more psychological safety. Here's what I would tell you. Trust is a noun and a verb. Trust exists, and I trust Jen. Okay? It's an action. The more of the verb we do, the more of the noun we get. Psychological safety doesn't start with the senior leadership, although if it does, that's awesome. Psychological safety is person to person, largely positionless, and it starts by us behaving in a way that creates it with the people around us. Okay. All right. I'm going to put Julie back to work. She's going to send you into your last breakout group. Then you're going to come back. And then I'm going to basically hand it off to Miss Elise to take us home. One question in your small breakout groups. You're going to have 6 minutes or however many minutes. Do it fast because Julie might make you go slower or faster than that. Here's your question. What's the most valuable thing I learned? What's the first thing I will apply? That's your question. Just share with each other what you're going to apply. Hold each other. Create some accountability for each other. Send them off, Julie. She'll tell you when you need to be back.
Hey, welcome back. Oh my goodness. Look at this. It's the diehard, dedicated, wonderful, attentive team that is going to bring home the final value and put the capper on this for all of those who decided to wait for the recording. So based on the conversations you just had, what we would love to hear is your bottom line up front. So what you're taking away from this, what you will do with it, in one phrase or sentence. What is your key takeaway that should be shared with those who weren't here and all the people who are going to catch the recording later? And I'll take either a show of hands, just to speak out loud, or in the chat, your choice. But of course, I'd love to hear voices. John, unmuted.
I would say don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. Don't overthink it. Don't overplan it. Don't overscript it. But be genuine in your conversation.
I see some notes in the chat. Would anybody else like to speak? Nan, you're muted, but your mouth is moving. It looks so promising.
Oh, no, it's just that I said resistance versus apathy. It's reminding me of the engagement, but then the person, just the very end, trust is a noun and a verb. The more verb we do, the more noun we get. That is a great way to end the session.
Yeah, I saw the heart from Nicoletta. Nice. Let them start by asking the question, Marta says in the chat. and seek commitment, not compliance, and sharing the decision tree concept with others. That's a great one, isn't it, Stacy? Stacy, had you seen the decision tree before? The reaction tree.
So I was sorry, my dogs are barking. I was commenting that I always coach others to kind of anticipate what is going to be the response before they go into that conversation. But I've never actually seen a decision tree graphic like this. So Kevin, with your permission, if I can just share that concept with others that I'm teaching, that would be great.
100%.
Thank you.
And if you come up with a better version of it, let me know.
Simple is great.
And Jennifer, what you say here in the chat, have the confidence to be kind. Now that's really something, right? That we need permission. But we do, to be clear and kind. We need to give ourselves that grace. Yeah. Wonderful.
And I like to prepare for the challenging conversations, because I think too often we go in unprepared, and then that's why they run amok.
Yeah.
Right
Well,
on.
I have the question about this tree to resistance. How about when it's not resistance, what we can get back? That wasn't in the tree.
I'm sorry, so ask the question again.
Well, and we had this tree of reactions, but if the first reaction is not resistance, but
yeah,
apathy,
we could go across and say, really, the question is like, what is it possible, right?
Okay.
So if it's resistance, it could be those, it could be disagreement, it could be, surprise, but you could have other frontline things. It all depends on what your situation is, right? I'm just using that as a simple example. So you could have several first line possibilities and then go down from there. Yep.
So speaking of possibilities, I want to share with you what to expect next, because we are at the end of our time. So possibilities in your future for reconnecting with Kevin and with this group. So after today, first of all, we would love your feedback. Any feedback you share with us, I will share with Kevin as well. So as your gift, if you would go ahead and click that first link in the chat and open up that feedback form right now, so you don't forget to make that happen, that would be fabulous. We will be sending an email with the edited recording and the chat transcripts and all of this information later. And then there are 2 upcoming events that you should know about. On September 20th through 24th, Kevin is hosting Virtual LeaderCon. Kevin can talk about that in just a second. And then on the 23rd, we are hosting 2 sessions on how to change group dynamics in 15 minutes or less, both of which will be highly experimental. I'm kind of excited about those. So Kevin has got more information here about how you can connect with them. They want to invite everybody to your event next week too.
Yeah, Virtual LeaderCon, I'm going to be in this chair for 5 days, Eastern time, from 10 a.m. till about 6:30 p.m. every day. 40 thought leaders during the course of the week, a whole variety of leadership development and professional development subject matter. Here's the thing, all for free. Con.com. Join us for as much or as little as you can. Love to have you. If you come, make sure you tell me this. I mean, when you're in and you're chatting, remind me that this is where you came from. Love to have you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so very much for hanging out with us. We'll hang out for a couple more minutes for any last minute questions, but otherwise enjoy your weeks, your days, your challenging conversations.
Thank you. It's very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.